Walking straight across the outer court from any of the 3 gates in the outer walls, you would come to one of the 3 gates leading into the inner court. The inner court is a perfect square measuring 100 by 100 cubits, or roughly 200 feet by 200 feet, Ezekiel 40 verse 47. The altar of sacrifice is placed in the center of the inner court, Ezekiel 43 verses 13 to 17. Let's begin by looking at the inner gates. While the outer gates have 7 steps, the inner gates have 8 steps to their entrances. At the top of these steps is the porch. Thus, the layout of the inner gates is a mirror image of the outer gates. In other words, the layout is in reverse direction of that of the outer gates. For the inner gates, you will reach the porch once you walk up the steps. Whereas for the outer gates, one has to walk up the steps, past the guardrooms, before reaching the porch. Both the porches of the outer and inner gates open onto the outer court, as indicated by the yellow color in the diagram. In Ezekiel 40 verses 35 to 42, Ezekiel was shown the inner north gate. Except for the placement of the porch, the inner north gate has the same measurements as the outer east gate. In the porch of the north gate were 4 tables, where the sacrificial animals were slaughtered for the offerings. Outside the porch, on each side of the stairs, were 2 more tables. So there were 8 tables in all, 4 inside and 4 outside, where the sacrifices were cut up and prepared. Moreover, there were also 4 tables of finished stone. On these tables were placed the butchering knives and other implements for slaughtering the sacrificial animals. Ezekiel was describing what he saw at the inner north gate. It is plausible that the inner east and inner south gates likewise have the same number of tables. Inside the inner courtyard there were 2 one-room buildings for the singers. One beside the inner north gate, with its entrance facing south, and the other beside the inner south gate, facing north. The inner court is a perfect square, and in its center is the altar of sacrifice. The altar is characterized by its ascending tiered design. The base is roughly 2 feet high. From the base to the lower latch is 4 feet. From this lower latch to the upper latch is 8 feet. And the topmost altar half is another 8 feet. Consequently, the total height of the altar amounts to approximately 22 feet. To put this into perspective, the typical floor-to-ceiling height of a HDB apartment is around 8.5 feet. Therefore, the altar presents itself as a formidable and imposing structure, towering to more than double the floor-to-ceiling height of a standard HDB apartment. The altar half spans approximately 24 feet in width and length, forming a square shape. Extending from the top corners of the altar are 4 horns. The steps of the altar faced east. Before the altar can be utilized for its intended purpose, it must undergo a purification process lasting 7 days, during which animal sacrifices are offered. On the 8th day, following this period of cleansing, the altar is formally dedicated for use. If you recall, one has to walk up a flight of 7 steps through the outer gates to reach the outer court. From the outer court, one has to walk up 8 steps of the inner gates into the inner court. And from the inner court, there are 10 steps to the entrance of the sanctuary. Consequently, the temple complex is situated on land sloping gently downwards towards the east, with the sanctuary positioned at its highest point. This topography likely facilitated the river of life flowing from the temple threshold, meandering downhill along the sloping terrain towards the east.
Then he brought me to the nave and measured the side pillars. And he measured the length of the nave, 40 cubits, and the width, 20 cubits.
The outer sanctuary is rectangular in shape and is roughly 80 feet long and 40 feet wide. At regular intervals, along the walls of both the inner and outer sanctuaries, were carved cherubim and palm trees, alternating with each other. Compared to Solomon's temple, this temple is devoid of furniture. There is only a wooden altar, probably standing before the entrance into the inner sanctuary. Nothing could be burned on it since it is made of wood. Double doors separate the outer and inner sanctuaries. Each door has 2 hinged leaves. Only the bronze man entered the inner sanctuary. It is interesting that Ezekiel did not enter or was not brought into this sacred space. One may speculate whether Ezekiel was prohibited from entering the inner sanctuary. He was informed that it is the most holy place. The inner sanctuary is described as a square, approximately measuring 40 by 40 feet. Interestingly, both the outer and inner sanctuaries of Ezekiel's temple share the same dimensions as those found in Solomon's temple. After completing the measurements of the temple and its structures, the bronze man concluded the tour by leading Ezekiel out through the outer east gate, the same gate they first entered the temple complex. He proceeded to measure the exterior of the temple wall, emphasizing its function as a separation between the holy and the profane. According to the NASB and KJV translations, each side of the wall spanned 500 reeds, equivalent to 3,000 cubits, or approximately 6,000 feet. This would suggest a vast open space surrounding the temple complex. Given that the temple itself measures only 500 cubits, or 1,000 feet. However, the ESV and NIV translations of Ezekiel 42 verses 16 to 20 render the measurement as 500 cubits for each side of the wall. This is likely the correct interpretation, as Ezekiel 45 verse 2 specifies an open space of 50 cubits, or 100 foot surrounding the temple complex.
Out of this there shall be for the holy place a square round about 500 by 500 cubits, and 50 cubits for its open space round about.
An open space of 100 feet, or 10%, is more proportionate to the size of the temple complex. In this graphic, you can see the comparative sizes of Solomon's temple, Herod's temple, and Ezekiel's temple. Note that the above dimensions of 60 by 20 by 30 cubits for Solomon's temple apply specifically to the sanctuary comprising of the holy place and the Holy of Holies, and not the entire temple complex. Ezekiel's vision presents a grand and glorious temple complex that surpasses both Solomon's and Herod's temples in terms of size and magnificence.